The film opens and it is 1942 and World War II is raging on. We then see a lone torpedo bomber soaring over the South Pacific Ocean. It consists of Captain Harold, Tony, and Jean. They have been separated from the other planes and are struggling with their navigation. They're low on fuel and try to communicate to base, but the Japanese intercept them, so they pull the plug. They drop their bomb to lose some weight and try to head back to base. The sun has gone down now and the captain realizes they won't make it. Harold tells his crew to put on their vests and prepare for a water landing. They gather emergency supplies and fly just above sea level. They hit the water hard and are thrown around in the cockpit before coming to a stop. The crew barely escape the plane as it sinks, then board an inflatable life raft. They talk for a bit, then head to sleep thinking they will be rescued by the morning. The next morning the group all face a different direction to look out for rescue plans. Jean and Tony are still optimistic, but Captain Harold looks a bit more worried. Later, Jean spots something, but Tony says it's just a bird. As it grows closer they see it's not flapping its wings and must be a plane. They take off their shirts and wave them in the air because they have no flares. They scream and yell, but the plane flies past them after being too far away to notice the raft. The crew sits defeated and the captain says that was their one and only chance. He says that was their search and the next round will be even further from them. The boys finally realize the danger they are in and worry because they have no food or water. Harold then takes charge and they take an inventory of their remaining equipment. They have 2 magazines, a pocket knife, pliers, rope, a whistle, and some other miscellaneous objects. Tony also points out they have their life jackets and the rope around the raft. Jean and Tony then take off and throw their shoes overboard so they don't scuff the raft, and Harold keeps his in case he needs to walk if they reach land. Then Tony discovers that he still has his pistol with him. They spend the day talking and covering themselves from the sun, and night falls. They plan a watch schedule and go to sleep. Later, Harold asks Jean if he had anything to drink yet. Jean asks what, then sees the captain urinating into his shoe and drinking it to try and stay as hydrated as possible. He gags as he witnesses it, then goes back to sleep. The next day the captain reveals the wind is pushing them to Japanese islands. The boys are worried, but Harold says if the winds change they could be blown to friendly islands, but it would take weeks. They worry about starving, so Jean puts together a makeshift fishing rod using some rope and a spring from a magazine. They attach some pliers as a sinker and use part of a handkerchief to imitate meat. The trio casts it into the water and soon after something pulls on it aggressively. They try to reel it in but are thrown back and see their hook has been completely bitten off. Days go on and the crew sit with clothes over their head and another hook in the water. Eventually Jean gets restless and dives into the water to cool off. He enjoys it at first, but the raft drifts away and he begins to worry about sharks. He swims back rapidly and makes it aboard. They reach day 5 and the crew is sunburned and exhausted. Tony tries to drink some seawater but the captain stops him. They have been drinking their urine for 4 days but are now out. Harold then finds a hidden pencil and becomes excited because he can make a chart. He starts sketching and they figure out their location and the nearest peaceful islands. The wind is still blowing them in the wrong direction, so the crew creates a makeshift anchor that will stop their drifting. They celebrate this small win and the captain cries a tear of joy. Later, the group prays for God to bring some rain and protect them. They start to become a bit hysterical and sing and laugh about their situation. Night rolls in and as the guys sleep their prayers are answered and it begins to rain. They spring into action trying to collect as much as they can. They laugh and cheer and drink as much as possible. In the morning, Jean fishes again but catches nothing. This time he takes out his knife and starts stabbing into the water despite being told to stop. He hits something hard and thinks it's the raft, and the captain rushes to grab some cement to patch it. Suddenly, he lifts his knife and they learn he has actually captured a massive shark. It is thrown into the boat and Tony wrestles it as Jean continues to stab rapidly. It dies and they begin slicing it up as blood pours out. Jean finds a small fish in its stomach and eats it whole. They all go to town eating the shark and saving bait to fish again later. As they eat, the captain says they are only 390 miles away from safety. That night the group notices a huge school of sharks in the water that must have smelled the blood. They stay on the raft, but Jean later mistakenly puts his hand in the water to rinse them off. A shark bites onto his hand and Tony fires 4 times into the water. All Harold can do is wrap up Jean's hand and tell him to keep pressure on it. Days go by and they pray every day as Jean continues to try and fish. At night they watch the stars and they mark their days at sea on the raft. On day 15, Jean uses Tony guns to shoot a seagull that landed on their raft. Harold dives into the water to retrieve it but sharks begin to circle him. The gun jams and the shark chases the captain through the water. He barely makes it in time as a massive shark swims underneath. The group then eats the bird together and another day passes. On day 20, tensions begin to rise after the boys fall asleep during watch. The captain screams at them and Jean accuses him of being responsible for crashing the plane. He says the captain never mapped properly and now he is lying about being on course for some islands. Finally, Harold reveals he expected to be at the islands 3 days ago but they have missed them. Jean screams at him some more and we see a flashback that shows Harold falling asleep in the cockpit, which causes them to get lost. Harold tears up and admits his mistake as he tells them he is terribly sorry. The boys forgive him and he redeems himself after he creates makeshift oars out of his shoes. They begin to paddle and agree that whoever sees land first gets to pick out where they eat dinner. More time passes, and the wind begins to pick up as the raft sways back and forth. It begins to rain and the men collect the water, but a storm forms and lightning strikes. Harold tells them to get ready to bail as water splashes into their raft. Massive waves crash into them and the captain is tossed overboard. Jean and Tony paddle towards him and pull him up, but a large wave forms overhead. Harold yells to hold on and it crashes on them and their oars sink to the ocean floor. The group is thrown off too and hangs onto the edge of the raft. They then manage to flip it upward and dive back on board. They outlast the storm and eventually the waves settle. The trio is completely out of strength and think they won't make it much longer. They talk about what to do if one of them dies first and they hallucinate and see things. The captain once again apologizes, but the boys say it is not his fault and he cries. Their eyes begin to close, but Tony says they have come too far to give up now. With their last bit of strength the men paddle, but it does not last long and they fall back down. Now defeated, the captain drinks some ocean water and Jean says he sees some rows of corn in the distance. They think he is hallucinating again, but he says it's not corn, it's something green. The others turn and they see an island in the distance. They begin to scream and cry, and the captain tells Jean he has won himself a dinner. They have a teary embrace and Jean thanks the Lord. They paddle as hard as they can and make it to shore before being knocked off the raft by a wave. They stumble onto the sand and hold each other as they walk ashore. Finally, we see this was a true story and the men survived 34 days at sea before landing on the island of Puka Puka. Here is a photo of the real crew.